Welcome to this course. In this video, we're going to give you a presentation on the Illustrator interface. It's a program that works with vectors. This means that whatever we draw is going to be generated through a mathematical formula. This allows us to augment and reduce the images without experiencing any changes in resolution, keeping them at a decent size. In the video, we're going to present the program, which is relatively easy to use, once we have a basic understanding of the tools and their uses. Throughout these lessons, we're going to be explaining the way I have organized my artboard and the different windows I use while developing my drawings. To start with, we're going to prepare a new document in which we're going to discuss how to use the tools that I've mentioned before. What we have to do is click on File, New, and a window will pop up in which we can see all of the options we can work with. This dialog box that's opened up offers us the modifications that we can do to adapt the new document to our needs. And it will be what creates the document. We can tweak some of the predetermined options. In the tags over here, we can see that there are a number of different options that we can modify. We're going to use it in more of a manual way. And we're going to write the proportions that appear on the screen ourselves in order to adapt our artboard in the best way possible. You can change the artboard's composition. You can make it horizontal or vertical, and you can decide how many of them you want to have. These are options that we'll work on later on. For now, we're going to continue with an explanation of what this file edition window does. What we're going to do now is change the artboard proportions because we need one to be at a medium size. This way we can show what I just said, windows and tools. We'll select one at a medium size, and we won't worry about this for now. You can make changes to the artboard. You can increase their number. Here where I'm pointing, you can say how many artboards you want in case Illustrator doesn't have a concrete number. The windows here, these icons here, what they do is represent the way in which the boards are set. This means whether it's vertical or horizontal. Depending on which one of these we choose, we're going to see it in one way, or we're going to see it in another. This here is the indentation. If we're going to be printing anything, then we should modify the parameters. But seeing as we're working for the web, it's not something we need right now. Also, here we can see the proportions. We can change them by millimeters, pixels, centimeters, and other measurements. But we're going to leave it on pixels. Here we can see the different color modes. We can use RGB or CMYK. RGB is a color mode precisely designed for work on the web. It's a spectrum that divides the colors up in a more saturated way than CMYK. It's not convenient to use RGB when we're going to be printing because the colors would change and we don't want that. If we change to CMYK, we'll see that a little alarm will go off because, as I've said before, the colors change a lot. This window that we have right here is from the interfaces of older versions of Illustrator. Everything we see here is positioned in a different way than what we have in the actual version of the program. Here we can see the artboards where we have to vary the height and the width, the position of the artboards, the number of them, the indentation, but we're going to focus on the resolution window that we have right here. This window helps the color mode window, RGB or CMYK. Because due to the color scheme we choose, we would have to modify the image resolution accordingly. In RGB, we already have 72 pixels per inch as a default. That's pre-established this way because we don't need a lot of resolution for images on the web. However, we can use the rest. This would just make the image a bit heavier, so it's not a good idea to work with high resolutions when we're working for the web. Also, in the case of vector images, the resolution has no real effect on them, as you can change their size without having to worry about changes in the quality of the image. This is one of the advantages of working with vectors. CMYK is a little bit more specific because it forces you, if you want to have a good quality image, to work with 300 pixels per inch. What we're going to do here is take advantage of this window to change some of the parameters that were established and create our document with which we're going to work on. We're not going to do much more, so let's just create our document. Here we can see the space we have as our artboard, in which we can see our tools and our windows. And we're going to start from here. Here in the right margin, we can see the Illustrator windows that I use to work. Our first window is the Navigator window. I use this mostly for the drawing's mobility. You can click on it and this window moves the artboard depending on where we want to put it. We can also make it bigger and zoom in to see it with a bit more clarity. Or we can zoom out. If we click here, all right, perfect. If we wanted to work with anything else, well, you could look at this window where you have a lot of options. If not, we're going to double click on this tool right here and fit the image. Okay, so now it's perfect and centered. Now we're going to go on to the second window that, honestly, I use a lot. And it's really, really useful. It's the color window. With this, we can manage the color theme we want to apply to the fill. It has a very large array of colors, so we can use it with no difficulty and choose the fill we're going to use with each of the objects. What we can also do is choose the fill that we're going to use on our exterior lining of the object. We can alternate these, and also what we can do is with this button here, reset them to default, so that'd be white or black. This here is to change the color from the fill to the line and vice versa. And we can double click on the image to vary it from a window that comes up when we apply this action on the fill. We can do the same thing with the line, and we could also use the samples panel. In this window, you can save the colors that you're going to use. What allows us to get them easier and faster is that we're working with a pre-established color palette, or one that we've decided to create. It's comfortable because you can save these in files, the same we did with the patterns and gradients that we made earlier. Okay, so this is the gradient window. With this, you can make different transitions between colors in the same object. Okay, it has an extension that lets us use the controllers. In the transparency window, we can see the fusion modes with which we're going to work on our objects on our artboard. Depending on which one we choose, we're going to get different results. As you can see in the window, there are a lot of types. What I use more to darken or lighten are the multiplier or the screen effect. The screen effect makes the objects lighter and multiply makes them darker. With the rest of effects, it's honestly just a question of trying them out and seeing if the tone adapts to the project, and can be used in the drawing however you see fit. I don't really have any preferences, but screen and multiplication are the ones that I use the most and the ones that are more convenient to me when I work. So I recommend that you try them out and don't be afraid to experiment. This tab right here is the Opacity tab. Here we can increase or we can decrease the transparency. I'm going to show you an example so that you can navigate it better. Okay, so what we've done is modify the number in the Opacity tab, and we can see with that we've taken away from the transparency of the object. As you can see, it's just a question of trying this out. We can increase, we can decrease. Let's leave it at 100 just to avoid confusion, okay? In the next window, we're going to look at the brush windows, okay? We can shortcut to this by using the B key. Okay, so this turns the mouse cursor into a brush that we can use to create lines in our drawing. Although the initial line looks a little pixelated, the program will take charge of correcting it. So it'll soften it for us to turn it into curves or nodes, the elements which vector programs work with. The first thing we're going to do is choose a brush out of the ones we have here, and I'm going to draw a line so that you can see what I mean. As you can see, the low quality is substituted for a high quality. We do have to be careful when we draw lines and curves that are closed, as the program will sometimes interpret it however it wants, and the results may vary from what we're looking for. Here we have the window where we can edit the default systems that the program uses. When we click on the brush, we choose. We can change the width, the position, the angle to which it adapts, and we can change the size scheme of the brush depending on what we want to use in our illustration. We can also use this through the controllers here if we don't want to change the main image we have here. Okay, so we just have to explain that we can create our own brush. So we don't have to use one that's pre-made. This one here is the one that modifies the brush size, as I said before. We can see these 3 points that I'll explain later. The good thing about Illustrator is that it's a program that you can use without a tablet, because the program gives you the ease of generating simulated pressure. Right now, well, I'm working with a tablet, you'll see that, so I have the option of changing my brush with the pressure I apply. Okay, I'll modulate with my pressure. If we click here, we can give the program the option to that depending if we press more or less, these parameters will be modified. If we increase the number that's in the tab here, it will change the size of the points we can see up here. It's a pre-visualized brush mark. The first one is the finest point that we can make with the brush. The second, or the middle one, is the most stable one. And if we look closely, we can see the last one here, that is the one that will vary the most if we modify this number. It can acquire either the least pressure to the medium pressure to the maximum pressure, from more to less, from less to more. For now, we're going to leave it as it is. We're not going to change this much more, and we're going to make our own brush. Let's hit OK. Although you might see these options here, I just use this one in the middle to not change the line art from the rest of what I draw. Okay, so let's do a small test with what we've been working on. Less pressure, and now more pressure. I'll tell you that I'm using a normal everyday tablet with pressure detectors, and it makes a line this way. Where I've pressured more, the line is thicker, and where I've pressed less, it's thinner. The rest of the brushes have different aspects, but you can choose whichever one you want because the illustration is yours. And the way you work is something very personal that you can decide with your own judgment. We have here another series of line styles, like this one here. I'm going to try this now so you can see how it's used. It looks like it's a more traditional one, like a pencil. As you can see, the line changes. It has a sort of texture and varying the size. We can also modify it. There's a whole library of brushes in which Illustrator has included a whole bunch of styles to make different shapes. So I'm going to choose these watercolor styled ones so that you can see how they work. So for what we can see, it has different styles and shapes that we can use depending on what we want to do. These mostly have transparencies, so we have to be careful when we use it. I'm going to change the color so we can see better how the opacity, that's the default, makes an effect. It's a clear tone, like a watercolor tone, and if we modify it too much, it's going to look kind of strange. You have to be careful with shapes that are very closed because the program gets lost and does things like this, okay? Okay, so these are the types of brushes that we have. And you can always create your own brushes, or you can always use the program's ones. You can modify them, edit them. It's more a question of experimenting with them and trying them out to get used to working with them. And this is your thing. You have to be comfortable with what you're using, okay? Okay, now let's take a look at vectors. If we hit Ctrl Y, the program will go into this state. The lines that you saw earlier are the vectors. If we use a shape brush and we generate a spot, it's not going to act like a normal line brush. First, I'm going to do this one here, and then hitting B, we're going to change to the line brush. Both forms seem to have the same characteristics, but if we hit Ctrl Y, we can see that the blot brush has created a flat object, whilst the line brush has created something external. It's created a line composed of anchor points and vectors. The shape varies completely. Depending on what you're looking to do, I recommend the use of the line brush because although it represents a kind of a bigger mess, the blot brush is more complicated to use, so it's just better to use the line brush because having more nodes gives it more uses. It's easy to manage. Okay, there's not that much left to say about brushes. I think we can go straight to the new window that we have to see now. That would be the artboard. The artboard is basically this white blank canvas that we're going to use. And thanks to this program, we can work with more than one. Okay, as I said before, we can create just as many as we want. We can also eliminate them if there's too many or if we don't need them anymore. we do have like a tool that can be used as an extension to edit them. It creates a new mode in which the table gets the controllers that we can see here. We can duplicate them if we hit Alt. Okay, so they would be balanced, and if we also hit Shift while dragging, it moves parallel. It lets us move through the workspace. It lets us make it wider or bigger vertically. The only thing we can't do is rotate it, but we shouldn't be too interested in that right now because we're going to be working on the inside, and the formats with which we're going to work aren't in any form that isn't vertical or horizontal. Let's have a look at these tabs here. In one of these, we can define much more what we can do within the artboard. The artboard doesn't really have any more secrets. Now we know we can make them bigger or smaller with the Navigator. We can also adjust it with the hand tool. We can add more tables. We can take them away. We can modify their size, etc., etc. What I'm going to do now is erase what we don't need, and we're going to work with our small square. We'll continue with the rest of the windows that we have left. So let's start with this one. It's the information window. What this window does is give us the information on the area, like our name says, in which you're working on in the X and Y axis. It shows you where the object is placed, and, well, the parameters on the right correspond to the height and width of the object. In our case, the square. Okay, so apart from being able to change it manually and simply stretching out our object, you can change the panel that's right above it. If we change it, even minimally, the numbers of our object, you can see how little it moves compared to its original form. If we hit this button here, okay, when we're making it bigger or smaller, what we're doing is conserving its proportions. Okay, so this button right here is the color wheel. With this, we can change the color of an object, and what is going to happen is we're going to be able to see the colors that our illustration has, unless we choose a specific color. What the program does is block the black and white colors automatically, and that makes it so we can't modify them unless they are activated, unselecting them like this. We hit OK, and what we do is open the color wheel again. You can see the black has disappeared, and what we have to do is change these parameters in our controller, where we can change both the line and the filling. As you can see, you can use any color you want, change the saturation, the darkness, the light. This doesn't affect the image in any way, because if we hit cancel, it will go back to how it was. To explain the Pathfinder window, I'm going to need another square to use as an example. I'm going to hit M, or copy one and create one from scratch. In this case, I duplicated it holding down the Alt key and dragging it. I'm going to put it over these two squares, and we'll see what happens with our objects. Okay, so the first button is to join objects. And this is Pathfinder's first option. As you can see, it's created a unique shape, a solid object, combining the objects from both squares. In the second one is, well, we use that one to subtract. What does this mean? If we put the object over the one we want to cut the figure out of, what we have to do is position it, superimpose it. We can select both objects, and then we would have to hit the second button of the Pathfinder. As you can see, we've created a gap. just so you can see it with a little more clarity, I'm going to create another figure. I'm going to change the color, pull this one down so you can see it. As you can see, it's an absolute transparency. It's as if we put a window in the object and we can actually see the other object behind. This one here is a little more difficult to understand because what it's going to do is create a figure from the intersection of the two images. We have these two squares here. Now, if we position one on top of the other, that small intersection that we're going to create is going to be the end result when we hit this third button. So this will be the third result, like a small rectangle. Okay, so honestly, I use the join and cut ones more than this, but maybe you guys can find this a better use. I don't know. This last one here does the opposite of what I've just explained. What it does is erase that intersection there. It completely erases it. Instead of leaving an object, it erases it. I don't actually really use the rest of them, but I mean, people don't really look at them very much, but it's just a question of trying them out. All right, one cuts out the shape, the other one superimposes them, another one erases certain points in the lines. I prefer to stick on the topic of joining and division as main qualities of the Pathfinder. Okay, so in the last panels that we have to see would be the path window. I'm going to create another square to explain this properly. And, well, we can define the path as the exterior line that covers our object. In this case, it's this like black line here. We can modify this either from the sample panel or here in the toolbar, where we can change the color easily, moving it through the spectrum that it generates. I've left it in like a light brown, but you can change it when you're practicing. Use the color you want. Okay, so this window has different options with which we can change the path. We can increase its thickness. I'm going to increase its thickness so like it looks a little bit more notorious. We can change the angles. I normally work with these four here. This usually rounds them out, okay? These ones right here cuts the edges, and I don't really use these ones. I don't really go away from these ones here. The flats and rounds are the ones I normally use. And they're the ones that give them like a stylish finish, okay? Depending on what you're doing, you know, obviously, but I would stick with these four right here for commodity, simplicity, and because they look better, really. Okay. So we can see that this changes depending on the option that we put in. And this button here is used to divide our path. If we click, we can see the result. I use this more to create peculiar contours, or maybe when I want to make a series of continuous points, maybe to make stickers, or maybe a specific pattern. Okay, so to generate them, I hit the two buttons in the middle. I put some distance in between them, like a medium distance. And this is more or less the result. It's going to be different depending on the parameters that we put in these windows. It can vary in length and shape. It's all going to depend on however you want to use it, really. It's just better to play it safe and right now, and if you want to use like a flat path, we can experiment later on with these ones. Okay, so what else? Well, we've got these two windows left, I guess. These ones here floating around, that would be the link panels. So they're basically images that we have in our document, that we want to have in our document. If we put in, for example, I don't know, let's put one that we have on our desktop in. Okay, we're going to place it, and we can see this little miniature figure in the link panel. This X that we have in the middle represents an image that hasn't been embedded. That means that if we open the same document on another computer where we don't have this image, where it hasn't been embedded, it's just not going to show up. To be able to erase this square and work in a safer way with the images we're going to put into our file, we're going to embed this image. How do we do that? Well, once we've selected the image, this one right here, all we have to do is select embed. This gives us this little icon here that tells us that the image has been embedded and that we can now work from anywhere without any risk of losing it on any computer. It does make this file heavier, so it's not really recommended to embed a lot of images. Okay. So later we have the actions panel. It's actually just a series of predetermined movements that have been saved by the program. So we can create one this way, hitting new file here. We're going to call it a new square, okay? We don't have to do much more. We just have to hit record. All right, let's see if I can remember. So hit the red button. And once it's recording, we have to make the movements that we're going to use throughout our design. So this way, if we have to repeat it, we don't have to continuously be doing the same actions manually. This window is pretty useful in the case of when we have to be repeating a same thing over and over again. Let's try this again. I don't know if it's going to work out. Okay. Can you see how the thickness has increased in the path? But it hasn't rotated it because it didn't use the tool designed for that, the rotate tool. So what I'm going to do is record this action again, but this time I'm going to apply the rotate tool. Okay, I'm going to grab onto one of the corners, I'm going to move it, and this should have been recorded. So if we watch the instant replay, hitting play, it automatically gets thicker and it rotates. And we can do this with pretty much any option that Illustrator gives us. I'm going to try with some different parameters to see if it's not really a tool that I use a lot, but it's useful if we're working with repeating actions. Okay. Okay, I'm going to hit record. Okay. And then we have our group, and I'm going to try it again with some other shapes. Let's hit play. See, the thickness increases and the object rotates. We can try again. I'm going to repeat it sometimes so that you can see it better. I know it can seem a little bit tedious, but in the case that you like this window, well, it's pretty much going to be your savior, okay? You're not really going to notice the rotation in the ellipse because, well, it's round and you can't really tell, but you can see it in the path. And, well, that's about it. I really hope you guys like this lesson, and I'll see you in the next part on Illustrator's interface, where we'll talk about the tool we're going to use throughout the course. All right, see you guys later. Bye.